All right, let's just get right into it. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into what is arguably one of the most chilling, meticulously documented periods in all of our historical archives. We're going to do a complete forensic breakdown of a 25-year window that just completely derailed the trajectory of Earth. We're taking a clinical, step-by-step look at the anatomy of a catastrophe, the era you probably know as the Great Descent, which spanned from 2890 to 2915.
6,100,000,000. I really want you to take a second and just grasp the sheer scale of that number. That is the exact, staggering human toll we lost in just a quarter of a century. I mean, we went from a thriving, interconnected planetary civilization of about 7.5 billion people down to a mere fraction of that in what is essentially the blink of a cosmic eye. So the question we have to ask is, how on earth does a global superpower planet experience a population collapse of that magnitude that incredibly fast?
Well, to answer that, we're going to break this near-extinction event down into 6 distinct phases today. We'll start with the 2890 arrival event, move through the hyper-tidal coastal annihilation, the global logistics and starvation crisis, the unregulated plasma drain, the atmospheric eradication of our militaries, and finally, the retreat to the peaks.
Okay, kicking things off with Phase 1, the 2890 arrival event.
When you actually look back at the start of the invasion, the math of it all is just wild. It completely defies standard military logic. It was this bizarre, inverted David versus Goliath scenario. You've got the human global population sitting at a robust 7.5 billion, and the invading force? Fewer than 200,000 adult entities. Think about that ratio for a second. But here's the catch. These weren't your standard foot soldiers holding rifles. These were 30-meter-long organisms, and each one possessed a decentralized network of literally hundreds of billions of quantum-dense neurons. They didn't need a massive swarming army because their individual computational power and automated tech completely outstripped literally everything human civilization had ever built.
Which brings us to the immediate aftermath, Phase 2, Hyper-Tidal Coastal Annihilation.
So the moment these entities arrived, the initial destruction wasn't caused by, crazy sci-fi energy weapons or orbital lasers. It was literally just blunt force physics. 120 massive biological arcs didn't just gently land on our continents. They plummeted straight into the Pacific Ocean, aiming right for the deep abyssal trenches. And the sheer physical displacement of that hyperdense water generated mega tsunamis with wave heights cresting well over 300 meters. That's taller than most skyscrapers. In just a matter of hours, major Pacific Rim hubs, Tokyo, LA, Shanghai, Sydney, Lima, they were just gone, completely obliterated by a wall of water. That single kinetic event caused 1.2 billion instant casualties. It was sheer physical displacement weaponized on a planetary scale.
Moving right along to the third phase, global logistics and starvation.
Now you might be thinking, well, if you lived inland, you were safe, right? Actually, no. That coastal wipeout triggered a secondary creeping apocalypse for everyone else. See, the true famine began because our modern world was so deeply interconnected. Those ocean impacts instantly severed the undersea fiber lines, they destroyed coastal power grids, and completely disrupted global satellite networks. So for the next 8 years, from 2890 to 2898, you had this total collapse of international commerce, supply chains, and agriculture. Couple that with massive water contamination, and it just ravaged the inland populations. Without a single alien weapon firing directly at them, 2.8 billion people perished simply because the fragile logistical systems keeping our civilization fed and watered just disintegrated overnight.
That takes us into Phase 4, which is easily the most chaotic part of this whole thing, the unregulated plasma drain. Let's look at how this death toll actually breaks down. We've talked about the 1.2 billion lost to the floods and the 2.8 billion lost to the resulting starvation. But take a look at that third metric on the table, 1.5 billion casualties from the unregulated plasma drain. That number is staggering. And what's crazy is that it was driven directly by the invaders' own biological needs. They were acting out of pure, uncoordinated urgency during their first decade on Earth. To really wrap your head around that massive loss of life, we have to define exactly what was happening here. We call this rhinal desperation. You see, after their incredibly long interstellar transit all the way from the Oort cloud, the invaders were suffering from acute biological starvation. They desperately needed human plasma to stabilize their quantum reactor cores. So before they had the logistics in place to set up, regulated industrialized processing farms, their massive 100-foot bioships just haphazardly raided flooded coastal cities. They literally exsanguinated, bled dry entire metropolitan populations to the point of local extinction. It was violent, it lacked any long-term strategy, and it claimed 1.5 billion lives in sheer, utter chaos. Next up is Phase 5, atmospheric eradication of militaries. Of course, humanity didn't just sit back and take this. We tried to fight back. Our armed forces attempted to mount traditional, ground-based counteroffensives against an enemy operating out of the abyssal depths of the ocean. But, well, fought isn't even the right word. Our forces were coldly and clinically neutralized. Here's how it played out. Step 1. Human armies launched traditional surface offensives along the coasts. Step 2. In response, the invaders don't bother sending foot soldiers. Instead, they deploy these quantum molecular silicon arrays. Step 3. These arrays artificially alter the local air density and gravity fields right exactly where our armies are stationed. Which leads to Step 4. Our infantry is instantly crushed by violent pressure spikes, or they simply suffocate. It wasn't a conventional firefight at all. It was literally the weaponization of the environment itself through localized barotrauma. This quote right here really nails the grim reality of it all. Human army formations were crushed by violent pressure spikes or suffocated by atmospheric disruption, rendering ground infantry completely obsolete. The invaders didn't just defeat our armies in battle. They made the very concept of a terrestrial infantry force physically impossible. 600 million lives were lost in those futile attempts to hold the ground.
And finally, we reached the last phase, retreat to the peaks. So the massive slaughter eventually stopped around 2915, but spoiler alert, it wasn't because we won a decisive battle, and it certainly wasn't because of some peace treaty. Total human extinction was halted by a purely cold logistical calculation. The invaders simply realized that if they killed everyone, they'd destroy the only source of the biological reactor stabilizers they desperately needed. So mercy played absolutely zero part in our survival. We weren't spared, we were just reorganized into a sustainable livestock grid to ensure their own survival.
By 2915, a really grim demographic split emerged among the 1.2 billion surviving humans left on Earth. As you can see here, the vast majority, about 750 million people, were captured and interned in automated coastal processing pods to serve as a perpetual plasma supply, just a horrific existence. But 450 million actually managed to flee. They retreated to extreme freezing altitudes, ultimately birthing what we now know as the Human Alliance out of that remaining uncaptured population.
Just to pull all of this together on a timeline, tracing these 25 years reveals a brutal, rapid descent. In 2090, we have the arrival and the immediate hyper-tidal waves. By 2098, we hit the absolute peak of inland global starvation as those supply chains fail. At the turn of the century, in 2900, we see the atmospheric military eradication completely crushing our armed forces. And finally, by 2019, the slaughter kind of stabilizes as the survivors retreat above the 2,500-meter altitude mark, basically doing whatever they can to escape the oceanic reach of the invaders. Which leaves us with one final, incredibly heavy thought. If humanity lost 6.1 billion lives to a desperate, starving, entirely uncoordinated force in just 25 years, how in the world can we possibly defeat them now? Now that they are fully entrenched, completely fed, and operating from an impregnable megacity 6 miles deep? It is a terrifying question for sure, but it's exactly what we're going to be exploring in our next explainer. Until then, keep learning and stay curious.